A prince's love versus a king's power. The air in the grand hall of Valeria's castle was thick with tension, mirroring the turmoil churning within Prince Antonio. His heart pounded under the weight of what was to come, his mind caught between duty and defiance. Every breath felt heavier, as if the very walls of the castle pressed down upon him, suffocating beneath the rule of a man who had lost himself to grief and cruelty. The once glorious kingdom was now a shadow of itself, drowning in war and tyranny since the queen's death. Aldric had been a great ruler, loved by his people, but the loss of his wife had shattered him. He had not just grieved, he had raged, lashing out at everything and everyone as if punishing the world for taking her from him. Prince Antonio stood before his father, King Aldric, his amber eyes burning with defiance. The people of Valeria had suffered under his wrath. Heavy taxes drained the villages, soldiers patrolled the streets like wolves watching prey, and any sign of disobedience was met with swift, merciless retribution. He no longer fought wars for honor or protection but for conquest, as if expanding his empire could somehow fill the emptiness in his heart. His cruelty extended even to his son, demanding unwavering loyalty and absolute obedience, leaving Antonio to grow up beneath the shadow of a man whose love had turned to unrelenting dominance. Now, greed and power consumed Aldric, driving him to seize control over all neighboring lands, and Antonio could no longer stand by and watch his father destroy everything that had once been good. "You cannot force magic to bend to your will, father. Witches are not weapons." Antonio's voice echoed through the hall. King Aldric's icy stare was unmoved. "Power is taken, not given, my son. If I control magic, I control fate itself." Antonio clenched his fists. He had tried to reason with his father countless times, but the man who once doted on him was long gone. Each time he protested, he was met with cold indifference, or worse, fiery wrath. He knew what was coming. His father's hunger for power had reached a terrifying peak, and now the entire kingdom trembled under his rule. Any sign of disobedience was crushed, any voice raised in opposition silenced. Antonio himself had borne the brunt of his father's fury. Harsh words, punishments, and the constant, suffocating pressure to conform to Aldric's ruthless ideals. His latest endeavor? Capturing a witch to manipulate her magic for his conquests. Antonio had pleaded, argued, even threatened to leave, but his pleas had fallen on deaf ears. The kingdom was already suffering under Aldric's iron fist. He could only imagine what horrors would unfold if magic were forced into his father's hands. And now, she had arrived. His heart pounded as the doors groaned open, knowing that her presence signified yet another step toward his father's terrifying vision for Valeria, a vision Antonio feared he might not be able to stop. The doors to the throne room groaned open, revealing a battered figure. The witch was dragged in by 2 guards, her red hair matted with mud, her face smeared with dirt. Chains bound her hands, but her emerald green eyes glowed with defiance as she was forced to kneel. "This is the one, Your Majesty," the lead guard said. "A healer witch, but still powerful." Antonio's breath hitched. Beneath the grime, she was beautiful, radiating an aura of quiet strength despite her condition. But it was the fire in her eyes that struck him most: anger, pain, and an undeniable resilience. His stomach twisted as he took in the sight of her bound hands, the bruises marring her delicate skin. This was wrong. All of it. The weight of his father's cruelty pressed down on him like an unbearable burden, making his breath come short. He clenched his fists, disgust welling up inside him. How many more would suffer under his father's rule? How many more would be dragged into this nightmare, just as Lucinda had been? A lump formed in his throat. He had seen his father's wrath before, had felt it firsthand, but to witness it inflicted upon an innocent woman. It turned his stomach. This wasn't the kingdom his mother had dreamed of. This wasn't the kingdom he wanted to inherit. As he looked into Lucinda's eyes, He silently vowed he would not let his father win. "What is your name, witch?" King Aldric demanded. She lifted her chin, refusing to show fear. "Lucinda. You will serve me or you will perish," Aldric declared. Lucinda smiled wryly, a hint of amusement flickering through her gaze. "Magic is not slavery, Your Majesty." Antonio felt a surge of admiration for her defiance, for the unwavering strength she displayed despite her battered state. His father's cold eyes narrowed, but Lucinda did not flinch. Antonio clenched his fists, suppressing the urge to step between them. She was fearless, and in that moment, he knew she was someone who would not break easily, someone who, against all odds, he wanted to protect. Antonio's heart ached. He saw in her the same fire his mother once had, the spirit that had kept the kingdom kind and just. He stepped forward. "Father, this is wrong. Let her go." Aldric's face darkened. "Silence," he roared. "You grow weak, Antonio. Love is a disease, and you are infected with it." Lucinda's gaze flickered toward Antonio, drawn by his outburst. Unlike the king, whose aura pulsed with dark, insatiable hunger, Antonio radiated something different: warmth, conflict, yet undeniable strength. Even in his fear, he stood tall against his father, refusing to back down. She could feel the weight of his emotions, the revulsion toward the man who had shaped his world into a nightmare. It was a stark contrast to Aldric's suffocating energy, which felt like a storm ready to consume everything in its path. Antonio felt her eyes on him and, for a fleeting moment, met her gaze. Understanding passed between them. He was not his father. He would never be his father. And she saw it now. Just as he had seen something in her, she saw something in him. A light that still flickered despite the darkness surrounding them both. Antonio's jaw tightened. He had held his tongue long enough. This was not the kingdom his mother had dreamed of. He would not let it continue. As he looked at Lucinda, an unspoken understanding passed between them. That night, Antonio slipped into the dungeon where Lucinda was held. The air was damp, the torches flickering weakly. He found her sitting against the wall, eyes closed, conserving her strength. "You're either brave or foolish to come here, Prince," she said without opening her eyes. "Perhaps both." He crouched beside her, placing a small bundle wrapped in cloth beside her. The scent of freshly baked bread and roasted meat wafted through the air. "I brought you some food and water. You need to regain your strength." Lucinda hesitated before reaching for it, eyeing him warily. Hunger won over hesitation as she tore into the meal, savoring the flavors she had been deprived of. Antonio watched in silence, guilt churning in his stomach. This was a woman who had been dragged through hell at his father's command, yet she remained unbroken. He knew she deserved far more than just a meal. She deserved freedom, justice, and the chance to fight back. "I want to help you," he repeated, softer, this time, watching as her eyes flicked to him in cautious curiosity. She opened her eyes, searching his face. "Why?" "Because I hate what my father has become," he admitted. "But I don't just want to stop him. I want to save him. My mother believed in love, in kindness, in the strength of a just ruler. My father was once that man. If there is even the smallest chance that he can return to who he used to be, I must try. And I need your help to do it." Lucinda studied him, surprise flickering in her emerald eyes. "You would risk everything for that?" "I would risk more than that," he said. "Because if I don't, the kingdom will never heal." She hesitated before nodding. "Then we must be allies, not just captor and prisoner. If I am to trust you, you must trust me." "I do." His voice was firm. She exhaled softly. "Then listen closely, Antonio. We will not just escape. We will bring your father back to the light, for the sake of the kingdom. Over the next weeks, they worked in secret. Antonio provided Lucinda with food, healing herbs, and eventually the means to break free. But he did more than just aid her. He began slipping the healing herbs into his father's food and drinks, hoping to mend not just his body but the darkness that had consumed his soul. Each night as Aldric dined in his lavish halls, Antonio watched, waiting for any sign that the subtle doses were making a difference. But before their plan took shape, Lucinda had suffered greatly. Aldric, desperate to control magic, had subjected her to cruel tortures, attempting to break her will. He demanded spells of power, forcing her into brutal trials, but Lucinda refused, enduring pain rather than becoming his pawn. Antonio had watched in horror as his father's methods became more monstrous, the sight of Lucinda's suffering deepening his resolve. He could not stand by any longer. Lucinda, in turn, used her magic to gather strength and strategize. She observed Aldric closely, sensing the gradual shift in his aura, subtle at first, like a storm slowly losing its fury. Yet she knew it would take more than just herbs to truly restore him. One night, as she and Antonio planned their rebellion, she spoke softly, her voice heavy with wisdom. Perhaps the people should be the ones to remind him of what he once was. A rebellion may only create more war, but if we gather the people and make them speak, make them openly admit what they wish to see changed, the weight of their voices might do what no battle could. Antonio pondered her words, and the more he thought about it, the more sense it made. A rebellion would only create more war, more suffering, but if the people themselves stood together, openly demanding change, even his father would be forced to listen. It was not just about overthrowing a tyrant. It was about restoring the kingdom's heart. Together, they plotted, not for war, but for redemption, one that would be fueled by the voices of the people, united in their desire for peace. On the eve of the uprising, Antonio found Lucinda gazing out from his chamber window. The moonlight kissed her skin, revealing the beauty beneath the suffering she had endured. "Are you ready?" he asked. She turned to him, her expression softer than before. "I should ask you the same. You're turning against your own blood." "For the future I believe in," he said. "And for you." Lucinda stilled. A moment later, she stepped closer, pressing a soft kiss to his lips. "Then let's reclaim your kingdom, my prince." At dawn, the rebellion began. Antonio led the charge, his heart pounding as the people, long oppressed, rose with them. Lucinda used her magic to heal the wounded, to protect those fighting for their freedom, and to dismantle the dark spells Aldric had employed. The battlefield was chaos. Yet amidst the turmoil, Antonio moved with purpose, driven by the vision of the kingdom his mother once cherished. In the throne room, Antonio confronted his father. Aldric, once a towering figure of might, now looked weary, his age catching up to him, his power slipping away like sand through his fingers. Yet his eyes still burned with the remnants of his old fury. Lucinda felt a cold dread settle in her chest. The sight of the heavily armed guards flanking the room sent shivers down her spine. These were men who had carried out Aldric's cruelest commands, who had once dragged her into this very castle in chains. Would they now turn on Antonio? "You would betray me, your own father?" Aldric seethed, his voice a venomous growl. "You betrayed us first," Antonio declared, his voice unwavering. "You lost yourself in war and greed. I refuse to let our people suffer any longer." Aldric's eyes flickered with something. Regret? Pain? Perhaps for the first time in years he saw himself for what he had become, but his expression hardened once more. He turned to his guards and barked, "Seize them!" Lucinda braced herself for the worst, her pulse hammering, expecting the guards to advance. But to her astonishment, the men hesitated. Then, one by one, they dropped their weapons with resounding clangs. The act sent a shock wave through the chamber. Aldric's face contorted in fury. "What are you doing? I am your king." One of the senior guards stepped forward. "We are done fighting for a ruler who has forgotten his people," he said firmly. "We fight for the future now, for Prince Antonio." Lucinda watched in amazement, her admiration for Antonio swelling. He had not relied on force or intimidation to inspire change. He had won the hearts of his people with courage, wisdom, and an unshakable belief in justice. That was the mark of a true ruler, a man who would not just wear the crown, but honor its weight. And that, more than anything, reassured her that Valeria's wounds would finally begin to heal under his reign. Aldric looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then, as if the weight of his own sins crushed him, he sank to his knees. "What now? Will you kill me?" Antonio took a deep breath. The easy choice would have been vengeance, but he was not his father. He would lead differently. "Number, you will live to see the kingdom flourish without you. That is your punishment." Lucinda, standing beside Antonio, watched him closely. He had proven himself to be more than just a prince. He was a leader, a ruler with a noble heart, one who sought justice, not revenge. She felt something stir within her, admiration deepening into something more profound. He was a man fit to be king, and she knew the kingdom would thrive under his rule. With that, the tyrant king was dethroned, and a new era for Valeria had begun. Under Antonio and Lucinda's rule, the kingdom of Valeria healed. The war ended, and peace returned. Antonio had once wished for a different future, and now he had created it, with love, not power. For his coronation, Antonio extended an invitation to the witches' realm, a historic moment that signified unity and change. The witches, once hunted and feared, arrived with dignity, their presence a testament to the new peace between magic and the crown. Among them was Heroine, one of the coven's strongest witches, who had come with a special gift. As Antonio stood before the gathered people, ready to accept his title, Lucinda approached him with a knowing smile. "I have a surprise for you," she whispered, stepping aside to reveal Heroine standing beside a figure draped in regal robes. "King Aldric." Antonio gasped, his heart pounding. His father's once hardened features were softer, his eyes filled with something he hadn't seen in years. Clarity, warmth, and regret. "What? How?" Heroine performed a powerful spell, Lucinda explained. Not one of control, but one of restoration. But the key to his redemption was not just magic, it was facing the truth of his actions. "She allowed him to meet the spirit of your mother." Antonio's breath hitched. "My mother," he whispered. Aldric's face was pale, his hands trembling. "She was there. She spoke to me. She told me how disappointed she was in what I had become, how my grief had turned me into the very thing she fought against. She told me that love is not a weakness but a strength." His voice cracked, his eyes glistening. "She told me it is not too late, that I could still make things right." Antonio felt his own eyes burn with emotion as he stepped closer. "And will you?" he asked softly. Aldric let out a shaky breath and nodded. "Yes, my son. I will spend the rest of my life proving that I can be the man she once loved, that I can be the father you deserve." Aldric looked at his son, and for the first time in years he did not wear the mask of a tyrant. "My son, I was lost, but you have done what I could not. You have saved this kingdom." His voice broke with emotion as he reached forward and pulled Antonio into a tight embrace. "I like this beautiful witch. What are you waiting for? I want grandchildren." Antonio chuckled, his heart swelling as he gazed into Lucinda's radiant emerald eyes. Memories of his past struggles flashed through his mind. The fear of his father's wrath, the uncertainty of his own strength, the weight of the kingdom's suffering. He had once been a prince caught in the shadows of a tyrant, but now, standing before the woman who had been his light in the darkness, He knew he had become something more. He was a leader, a ruler who had chosen love over tyranny, hope over despair. And as he looked at Lucinda, he knew that together they would forge a new legacy, one built not on conquest, but on compassion and unity. With the cheers of the kingdom surrounding them, he took her hands in his, feeling their warmth, their strength, everything she had given him through their journey together. The world around them blurred, the grand hall, the applauding crowd, even his father's joyful laughter faded into the background. In this moment, there was only her. "Lucinda," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You have stood by my side through the darkest of times. You have healed not just my people but my family. You have shown me the meaning of hope, of love, and of a future I never thought possible." He brushed a stray curl from her face, his touch lingering against her cheek. "I cannot imagine a single day without you, nor do I want to. Valeria has found its peace, and now so have I. Will you do me the honor of being my wife, my queen, my forever?" Lucinda's eyes shimmered, her breath catching as tears of joy welled within them. She squeezed his hands tightly, her heart beating in perfect rhythm with his. "Yes, Antonio," she breathed. "With all my heart for all my days." The crowd erupted in cheers as Antonio cupped her face and captured her lips in a passionate, lingering kiss, sealing their love before the kingdom. The past was behind them, the future bright, and together they would rule Valeria in peace and unwavering devotion.